Hey everybody, I am going to take boards like this, straighten them up to make something like this. Ta-da! Hey, I'm Jeff Devlin of Schoolhouse Woodworking. I'm a licensed contractor, woodworker. We named our company Schoolhouse Woodworking many, many years ago because the goal was to teach. Wow, that's nice. It's not always the perfect method, but it's a way that I've learned over the 30 years doing this that I believe sometimes simpler is better. Okay, so you got a lot of wood and you want to make a tabletop or anything for that matter. The basics of woodworking start right here with making a board flat and straight. So that way if you're gluing them up together that they're not all cattywampus and trapezoidal. When we take 3 pieces of wood and glue them up next to each other like so, we need them to be nice and straight with no gaps at all. That is sometimes the hardest thing to do, is you will get sometimes a piece of wood like this that's not straight. I know it seems weird. A lot of people will take this and then put it at the end of their board like so and clamp it and try to pull that in, or just call it, well, that's the beauty of the wood. Sometimes that can work, but as soon as you have that gap, the glue doesn't bond. So we want all of these boards to be perfectly planed in size so that way they go well together. So I'm going to show you a couple of different fun ways to do it. Some by hand, some by machine. The first way is by hand, and to do that, the old school, more historic method is with a hand plane. Now you would need a vise. This is a small vise you can pick up at any woodworking store and some local hobby stores or big box stores. I have a big bench, but there's no reason to get into that right now. So what you're trying to do, and if you want to do this by hand, you will need what's called a joiner plane. This is a very long plane iron, and why that is because it helps you create a nice, solid, smooth line all the way down the board. Anytime you're using a hand plane of any kind, I like to skew it, and I start at the very end. And then it's not downward pressure. It's not like, ugh. It's not like squeezing, because what you'll see people mostly do is they push down so hard that that first little bit of shaving starts to dive down. So it's very, very light, and it's constant all the way down the board. And you'll see, and you just want to take off just a little bit. And what you're looking for, in this case, we want a peel. So we want this right here. If it's not this, then you know your hand plane isn't sharp enough. That'll be another video, because that's an art in and amongst itself to make sure you're using the appropriate hand plane. So you can also use your hand plane here, or your joiner plane, to see whether or not you're doing a good job. So a lot of the times what I'll do is I'll just hold my hand like this. Those areas I was a little deeper, I'll just take my pencil and go like that. So I know in this spot right here, I'm a little low. So when I come back with the hand plane, if I do it right, very light motions. And all you really want is those pencil marks to disappear. So you can see now that they're completely gone, and I'll come back and I'll do it again. Now I'm not going to say this is the quickest ever. Machinery is much easier, but you can see there's no light there, so therefore I know that this is nice and flat all the way across the board. So now this is ready to be joined together. Now, why don't you come over to the table saw, I'll show you another method. So we know that we have this bow in this piece of board. Now this is a scrap, and it's easier to show on the scrap piece than the larger boards. But all we're doing is taking something that we know is straight. Now this piece of plywood we know isn't bowed. Don't grab the sheet of plywood that's been sitting on your floor in your garage collecting oil, because that isn't going to work. It's probably going to be all bowed. I prefer to use stuff that's either 3/4 of an inch. And all you're going to do is mount it to this board. Now it could be as wide as you want or as thin as you want, all depending on the board that you're trying to straighten. So all we want to do is hang this board over this edge and create one edge that is perfectly straight. I would love to tell you I have my double-sided tape, but I don't today, and I don't have my hot glue gun, which these are all their 2 methods that you could use to secure this board. You could also get creative. If your scrap piece was longer, you simply could screw it to the piece of plywood, make your life really easier if it was oversized. In this case, I'm just going to use a two-part adhesive, which is basically I just drop a little bit on the board. It'll snap off. This is just like a gel glue. And then I use the activator on the bottom side of the other piece. And you don't have to go over the whole board, just in the areas that you're going. Dun, 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 dun. And voila, we'll hang it over just a little bit. And then you just push it and hold it for just a couple seconds. This method I did when I was young, and I had a shop a tenth of this size in a garage that everything was done by hand and everything was done this way, and I still was able to earn a living. So if you're in your garage right now or in your basement trying to do some of this stuff, good on you. You can do it. It just takes a little more time and practice. And voila. Perfect. So now we can just bring it right over to the table saw. I can set the table saw to whatever I want. I can take a little piece of the plywood off if I want, just like so. So I can make sure I cut that out completely. So now I just hold it. Now, when you're using a table saw, I always keep this left hand down flat, and that's forcing the piece of wood into the fence. And you'll see it's basically a jig that holds that down. Switch my hands. Instead of going all the way through the piece of plywood, you can see there's a straight edge on that board. Now I can pop it off. Luckily for me, it's normally just a little tap or a putty knife underneath, because this adhesive is good, but under stress, it does have a tendency to pop right off. So there you go. Voila. Now you've got a perfectly flat, straight piece of wood. So that way when you combine it with your other pieces, there's no gaps. All right. So if you've got one of these right here, you can also have a straight edge on a piece of wood. So there's your circular saw. Well, all we're doing is making a jig. A jig is nothing more than a way that a carpenter can do a repetitive thing over and over and over again without thinking. This is technically a version of a jig where you have the fence. What it does is the wood will stay up against the fence and make sure you're cutting the same width each time. So think of that in a reversed way. In woodworking, you have two ways of working with wood. You either bring the tool to the wood or the wood to the tool. So we have our piece of plywood. It's just a scrap piece again. I know it's the same thickness. I know it's dead straight because I know the supplier. I cut it on the table saw. It's all ready to go. So all I'm going to do is glue it. And this is something, honestly, my other panel jig, or my other jig like this, I've had for years. And I'm just going to place it anywhere along here that I want. It doesn't have to be perfect, preferably if you can. Just line it up with that edge. So these are little 3/4 inch nails. I can put it in the nail gun. And honestly, you can screw it if you want. It doesn't have to be pretty. I'm going to flip it over, and I'm going to throw some tacks in the backside. All right. So now when I flip it over, you can see I've got one straight edge, right? And I've got this massive piece of wood on the other side. Now, in your circular saw, you've got the side of the base plate, and then you have where the blade is. Under normal circumstances, you would basically try to straighten a board, and you'd look at where the zero is, where the blade or the kerf of that blade goes, and you'd take your tape measure and you'd measure over, and you'd say 5 inches. I don't know if you can see that. So 5 inches is to where that blade is. This represents the kerf And kerf is basically the hole or the groove that's left by the thickness of the blade. The kerf that you have will depend on the thickness of your blade. Most of them are 1/8 inch now. So 5 inches, you'd measure over 5 inches, and then you would put your straight edge. This stops all of that. So now I can put this on the side of my table and make my first cut, right? And all I'm doing is keeping it tight to the side, putting my glasses on, and I'm just making that cut. So voila. Now that looks a little gnarly because of the tear out, but quite honestly, you throw a piece of sandpaper on there, it'll be fine. But it doesn't matter because what now this does, if I want to straighten up this board over here, right, we'll take it and put it right here. I can literally lay this right down on my piece of wood, and now you can see I can take any bow out or take a little bit or a chunk of it off, so that way I know that that edge is perfectly straight. You can use this on plywood, you can use this on reclaimed wood, you can use this on the fancy wood. It's a really simple, really easy way to go, and I guarantee you, you're gonna have one of these forever. So put a hole in it and hang it on your wall.